Um, just a short introduction for everyone in the room. Ram is a founder of Coacharya, a leading coaching firm in India and actually globally. Vimal, veteran in HR and coaching industry, and Himanshu, strategic mindset, center of strategic mindset founder, again a very, very influential coach in India. I welcome all of you and thank you for your time for this
Thank you.
conversation. Thank you for thinking that this conversation can be important. And I hope we will all enjoy the conversation and enrich perspectives for everybody. So, so the topic that we chose today was myths of coaching at workplace. And it was interesting when we were having a conversation before this webinar to prepare for this conversation. We said, hey, why are we focusing on the lack of something, right? And then we said, okay, then we looked at the questions and I saw around 46 people registered today. And I looked at the questions as to what all people would like to know through this conversation. And the questions are falling into three categories. First category is questions around the coach process, coaching, in the sense the coaches are asking as to how do I crack to this layer of less information. And there are questions around what should I do as a coach. The second category is about what can coaching do and why is it so under leveraged in the organization. And the third category is again around the processes. So what we're going to do in this conversation, because we have practically 50 minutes with us, we'll be focusing on the scope of organizations and coaching as a methodology in the industry and the overall of it. So, and after that, if there are some questions which are unanswered, I may ask and request my panelists to see if they're okay to receive those questions on email or separately to answer them. So we're recording this conversation, and I think the crux of most of the questions about the industry goes to what are the possibilities in coaching. It's more around what all coaching can do. When coaching is known to unleash leaders' potential, what is coaching's own potential, right? And that's a question that can be answered in a lot of length and breadth. And I'm seeking your experience about what all have you seen coaching doing and enabling in the organization, in the industry, in people, and every length and breadth of it. So it might take some time to go through the answers, but that's quite worth it. So I invite, first of all, maybe to start with Vimal to share his experience, and then we go to Himanshu, and then go to Ram about their experiences. So over to you, Vimal.
Sure. So thank you, Jaya, for inviting me and everybody else on the call for sort of listening in, and it's great to sort of connect with all of you and hopefully get some perspectives, and also from the questions, as we dialogue, I think we'll get some additional inputs. So in my experience, I think broadly there are four things, as things which I have seen, which coaching has quote unquote managed to sort of in a way unravel. I think that's the best way to put it, because I'm not always sure whether you can term it under having necessarily achieved, because human beings are work in progress, and saying that it has sort of solved a problem seems to me almost like as if it's like a quick fix solution, right? So that's what, just as a background. So here are the four things I think it fundamentally sort of addresses. One is, particularly for senior leaders, I think coaching allows them to become more reflective, become more, inward looking in a way, because they're always dealing with the outside world and they don't spend enough time on themselves. So it allows them in a way to actually, think through what their own limitations, coping, threats, strengths, weaknesses are. And at the core of it, I think, is the fact that it makes them fundamentally reflective. And that becomes important as they go along in their journey. That's number one. I think number two, there are often very specific behavioral problems, okay? And behavioral problems at all different levels, because I think often coaching is associated only with the senior level people, but sometimes you could have a very bright young person, high potential, maybe only 2 or 3 years into the organization, or a department head or a manager who's otherwise very good but has quote unquote angles. And very often coaching has helped in sort of in a way both making the person aware of the angles, show them the mirror, but also, sort of dampen the angles, if you will, or take away the rough edges. Okay. So I think I'm making 2 points here. One is that, coaching is not necessarily only for the senior folks. It can actually be applicable across levels. And the second is it can be used to sort of roughen out edges. That's the second one. I think the third point I just want to say is that, there are certain fundamental human traits. For example, things like how do you balance yourself as a human being? How do you build trust among yourself and other people? How do you build resilience? And how do you improve judgment? And these are way beyond competencies because they are complex. They're not easy to play out. And I have seen that across the board, when you do good coaching work, while, initially the objective may be limited, but it does help in building some of these very underlying, traits, if you want to call them, or almost character of the person. It improves judgment, it improves trust, it allows them to be more balanced, it allows them to be more resilient, and so on and so forth. And the final one, which I think is always almost reflective in sometimes in very small ways, it makes people better managers. Okay, and I'm using the word managers very deliberately because when they see themselves changing at a fundamental belief level, some things change in them. They start treating people differently, and they almost start believing that other people have also got, angles and can be corrected, and they need to. So there's like a whole positive cycle which gets, built in. So Jaya, to start off, I think those are the 4 I have certainly seen, going, as we go through the coaching experience. I think those certainly work.
Interesting. So what I heard, everything was around the personal development and brilliance of a coach and the influence of a coach, right? Let me ask Himanshu and Ram about what's beyond that. What's the benefit for the organization? Because is it only limited to the person, or does it go beyond? So let me invite Himanshu to share his experience.
Thank you, Jaya. Thank you, Vimal, for setting the context. Good evening, friends, everyone, for being in this session. So I think on one hand, the coaching has at the upper extreme is what Lord Krishna did to Arjuna, is helped him deal with the dilemmas, paradoxes, and supported him gain clarity what is required in the purpose. At the other end, how do we make managers extremely efficient, effective, and productive? What Vimal said. When I look at coaching, I look at it in 3 ways: that how do we help someone set standards? Where is he operating now? And what are the new standards? Second one is to help him set the direction, that every organization wants to get the best out of the leaders. So what is the direction? And third is to setting him free, where if a person as part of the coaching process is set free, his ability to think clearly, choose precisely, and act decisively significantly improves. So at a human being level, life is all about these 3 things: the ability to think clearly, choose precisely, and act decisively. Now, if you visualize this circle, the beginning of the circle begins with beliefs. Now, our beliefs are part of our experiences, whatever we undergo. They are like things being written on your neural pathways as they are growing. Now, beliefs lead to a kind of an attitude, which is responsible for the behaviors that we have. Now, once we have those behaviors, each behavior has a shelf life for a context. It is the context that helps us form the behaviors, and even the same set of behaviors can become outdated when the context changes. So timeliness of behavior and the context alignment is key. Once we have the behaviors, we can measure those behaviors. So the next element is, how do we measure those behaviors? Behaviors, when they are measured, they lead to performance criteria. I often used to share the story that if all of us have a goal to beat Usain Bolt, what we'll do next. So people will typically say, oh, I'll buy Nike shoes, hire a coach, and I keep asking what next. Eventually get them, okay, we will run at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then I go, okay, what do you do a night before? What time would you sleep? So we'll sleep at 9:30. What would you like to eat? Or we'll eat high protein. And so like that, I'm saying, why are you doing this change in your behavior? And the answer is because our goal is different. We have to beat Usain Bolt. So when the goal changes, the context changes, the measurement behaviors also change, and that lead to productivity. So the next piece is the productivity. And it is the productivity which is in context with the alignment in the context with the organization vision. It leads to results. And when the results are in our favor, we have a chance to develop some new beliefs. So it's a cycle that goes on, beliefs, attitude, behaviors, measurement criteria, performance. So there is a very strong business case to have coaching if organizations can be made to understand and coaches can explain and articulate that well. So coaching is a process of discovery. Discovery of what I am doing. Discovery of why I am doing what I am doing. Discovery of how do I get there? And most importantly, the discovery of self. And the role that a coach plays, according to my experiences, I call them 3 roles. He's a soundboard, he's a thinking partner, and he's a mirror. So these are some of my overarching thoughts in the context of the question that you asked, yeah.
Wonderful. So it seems like there is an extension of inside out with their context. So what Vimal spoke about is how a leader can get improved by an intervention of coaching. And what I hear you saying is there is a context and how is it connected to the personal competence. Now, I'm still curious to know what's outside in here. Why and how can an organization benefit as a whole, as a system, and it's a value proposition for the organization? Say, hey, if you're not taking coaching, we're missing something because we are still not there, right? So what is that, Ram?
Okay, Jaya, I'm going to come in totally from the outside field, okay? And some of what I say is going to probably not to the liking of many others here. I don't come from the space of a coach. I come from my background experience as a corporate leader. I've been a CEO and chairman and entrepreneur and all kinds of stuff. And I think what we are doing as coaches today is detrimental to the value of what coaching does and what industries require. It is nothing about making the organizations understand. We need to understand. Organizations are paying us hard money. Why the hell should they employ us? And most of the HR guys are sitting out there, L&D people, having a checklist. In my training budget, how many people should I send for coaching or training or whatever, and put off the checklist. I am sincerely wishing for the day when the decisions on coaching will be made by the CEO and the CFO. And in fact, my best contributions to industries have been where it has been actually working with the CEOs. Otherwise, coaching doesn't work. Now, I've been part of some global surveys with some really large organizations across the world, which over the last 10, 15 years have done these leadership surveys with 10,000 more leaders. Time and again, these pain points and challenges have come up. And these challenges, as I remember them, are first, leadership succession. And if you look at it, even just the Indian scenario, Infy did a screw-up job on its leadership succession a couple of times. Today, Wipro is looking for its second leader in probably a few years. Many large companies are struggling. The leadership succession is the single biggest challenge, which in turn leads to the high potential identification and coaching and training. The second is, following Gallup's survey several years ago and work of Daniel Goleman, is about people engagement. How task orientation and performance orientation no longer relevant. Far more relevant is the emotional involvement and the people engagement, and how does that happen? Which in turn creates a culture of open, trusted, safe communicative environment, which has been proved by Google's Project Aristotle in recent times. And the third is the leader himself realizing that his leadership team is not a team, it's a group of people. As soon as they leave the boardroom, they are at war with each other. How do I create a collaborative environment in a siloed environment? So any coaching inputs that we offer as coaches need to address these issues, and these are systemic issues. The individual is one part of it. And my experience is how much I've been able to transform individuals. At the end of the day, when they go back to work in their workplace, which has not been transformed, they either regress or they resign. Coaches who have had this experience over a large number of people would know. And I have checked this out with a survey of many, many international coaches. And this is the truth. So yes, there's a need to transform. There's a need to address behavior. But unless it is done in the larger requirement of the organization context. So more and more I ask HR people when they come and ask me, you coach the senior leader, 4 or 5 of them in my company. I said, would you be interested if I coach them as a team? It'll cost you 1/5 of that amount. And I can guarantee you they will get exactly the same 100% value. Otherwise, don't pay me. They don't want it because they are dealing at the level of some L&D manager or HR someone who doesn't have the authority. But if I'm able to ask the same question of a CFO or a CEO, they would come running to me and say, hey, you are the guy I want. So I think we are looking at the wrong end of the telescope or microscope or binoculars or whatever it is when we ask this question. What are the coaching competencies that would help an organization? We should ask the question, what are those leadership competencies that organizations need today desperately, especially in days of crisis, that coaches can offer?
Interesting. So you're bringing a different paradigm to the conversation. And I understand that all the 3 dimensions are part of a system, systemic view and an individual view and the context around that. Now my question, and I get more curious when I think about this, is that it seems what I'm hearing from you is what the organization want and what we are providing as a coaches or what L&D is hiring doesn't seems to be in line. Everybody is doing a
absolutely. And the questions that if I went through when I went through the list of questions that you had provided us, many of those questions ask the same thing. What prevents organizations from hiring coaches? What is the ROI? Can any coach, honestly, if you're talking about transformation behavior with his hand on his heart, be able to say, this is the ROI I'm going to be able to deliver to you? There's no way of correlation. I know Lise Jones personally, who's promoting this fantastic ROI tool. It doesn't work, period. There's no way that you can just convert a behavioral modification into what makes sense to a CFO and a CEO. And you can say, oh, CFOs are idiots. That's our perspective. But ultimately, they are the ones who run the company. So how do I prove to the organization that I'm adding value? How do I say to the organization, okay, don't pay me if these are the parameters that you have set down? Unfortunately, the L&D and the HR do not have the authority to do that. As of today, I see in every organization today, while there may be a term called a business partner, they really are not business partners. When that becomes, and the HR person is actually a person who has run a business, who has the P&L background with him or her, and be able to do that, probably the situation will change.
Okay, interesting. So we are saying somebody who can make a decision doesn't have the authority, and somebody who has the authority is not making the decision. So, and then what are we as coaches really doing? How are we coming in the whole cycle? What's going on, really? Vimal, how would you respond? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of reflections to what Ram was saying and this thing, right? So I think let me try and sort of from my experience share 2 things. I think one is that who do we have a dialogue with within an organization as far as coaching is concerned? And Ram made a good point about L&D managers and HR and all that who can be your first point of contact. But I would agree with him that, if you're not having a dialogue at the right level, then, then you can't really showcase or take a more systemic approach to coaching and show the business benefits, right? So to that, partially I agree. The part where I think I have a slightly different experience is that it is up to us as coaches to choose, who and how do we engage with. Okay. And I don't want to comment because there are lots of coaches in this call, but I must say that, because over the last many years, one of the things is that there are no quality parameters around coaches and around the fact that, there are no real, measurements or research studies saying what is working or not working. But, to Ram's point, one of my, and working with several coaches and with global sort of, universities and education bodies, my experience is that the test of the whole coaching thing working or not working is often when a company calls you back and says, you work with this person, we see something happening in his department or function or business and in him, and therefore we would like to engage you further. Okay, so to me, if a client is willing to buy the second time or the third time, that is the only test of the pudding, because what Ram said about the fact that you can't directly correlate, a business success to a particular coaching, and I completely agree with that. But the point is that, that is true of everything, right? Any people intervention, can you ever put your hand on heart and say that this has made my business or my sales go up by 20%? You can't do that any which way, right? So why single out coaching, right? So that's one point that, how do you measure coaching? And to me, at a practical level, it's about whether the client calls you back and engages you or not. That's one. I think the second aspect I want to sort of bring in, the point which, I think both Himanshu and Ram made, and Jaya, you are asking questions around, is that I think you can take two philosophical approaches, right? One is that you can say that if I work with a sufficient number of senior people in an organization who are influential, the organization will change. Now it will change in many different ways, whether it is culture or whether it is, the core of the organization, even in terms of values, how top team members work with one another. But you need to be able to work with a fundamental belief that, every drop of water matters. Okay, that's one approach to take. I think there are also other coaches who actually come from exactly the opposite end, which is saying that, unless the water changes, nobody can succeed in this water. Okay. And my own view of life has been that, little grains of sands make the desert. Okay. And therefore, but however, having said that, you need to engage, and I'm in complete agreement with Ram that if you engage at a very low level in the organization, then that sand of, the grain of sand is not going to go anywhere, kind of a thing, right? But if you're engaging at a serious level, and that's a choice each of us makes, right? That where and how do you engage, kind of a thing. It's not true everywhere, but certainly it is something which we should, think about.
Great. So I think now what I'm hearing is it's somebody is doing some bit to reach a place, but really nobody's really looking at that picture. So a CEO has an aspiration that my leaders do well,
Yeah.
and that task is given to the HR and L&D. And other place I'm hearing they don't have the authority to make the right decisions. And then I'm also hearing that it is also up to the coaches to take responsibility of showing the ROI or creating the measurement around the results. So there are so many parts which are coming together to make something successful.
No, just to add on to that point, and I think you rightly summarized it. See, for example, as a coach, very often when I work with CXOs, I tell them that if I'm not able to talk to your CEO or your board members, I'm not going to take this assignment because, I'm not getting the full context of the perspective, right? So that's a call you have to take. And it's, I realize that it's not easy for everybody. It's difficult. And in many large organizations, it doesn't work. But I would certainly agree with, both Himanshu and Ram, and in general that, if you don't understand the context of the productivity and performance of the organization, then it becomes very difficult to do coaching in a very narrow sort of a way around the individual, because you don't connect with the context at all.
Interesting. And I'm now, I'm reflecting on my own engagements as to how many times have I spoken to the CEO. And whenever there is a request also, it seems that, the manager of the person who's getting coached will talk to you, not the CEO. And that's the kind of response we get. So I think it's also about where are you in the let me not call it a hierarchy, but in your career level where the CEO is open to talk to you, right? Himanshu, what's your take on this? What's coming up for you?
Yeah. So I guess each one of us will have our own frame of references based on the experiences. I'm fortunate to have coached more than 350 leaders externally and almost 300 leaders internally in TCS, my previous organization. I can't recall a single situation where I have agreed to not meet the CEO or the business leader because needed. So L&D and HR are a very important part of the process. They are the ones who open the doors or who get the mandate to get the coach into an organization for initiating the conversation. A lot depends on the coach. How does he influence the stakeholders, that how critical it is to get the complete picture? Now, in an organization, if it is N-1, obviously you meet the CEO and the chairman, and it's always I've been able to get that. If there is a business leader and he's nominating or sponsoring someone who are his direct reportees, it's good to meet him because CEO or the chairman may not have the line of sight on him. But a lot depends on how the coach presents his process, what is the conviction he brings, how he highlights that the stakeholders' involvement is very important. How does a coach put his own skin in the game that if you want the results and I will take the money only when the results are delivered, I need to know what you want. And at that point of time, the art of skillful conversation, conversation intelligence, influence, whatever it needs, I think the coach's brand also helps a lot.
Okay.
There never been a situation where a request for this has been turned down. There's a financial industry who I worked for last 5-6 years consistently. The door was open by a lady who's probably the junior most, and she happens to send out a message in a group of college, and my team member is part of that group. She picked that up. She was the one who opened the door. But eventually, she created the right notes and conviction for me to meet every important person. And every time I walk in that office, I always make sure that I say hello to her.
So I'm in a way hearing from all three of you that the responsibility of a lot of things in an engagement is on the coach. How do you maintain your brand? How do you build your credibility? How do you show results? And how do you... Now, another very opposite perspective that a lot of times people who are becoming coaches are becoming coaches because they're passionate about people development, right? And not everybody has a flair to be going the marketing way or building brands, and at times not even interested. What would you like to say to them who find it so difficult to come out of that shell, or let me say it's not even their preference to say, hey, I need to build a brand and credibility in the market? What would you like to say to that?
Interesting. Ram, you want to take that? I have a view, but Ram, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Okay, Ram, go ahead. Then I'll share.
Yeah, as Himanshu also said, the point is we all make our calls. We all make our calls based on the experiences that we come from and the kind of people that we are. Now, if there are many people who come to me because we run on one side, today, as it happens, probably the largest training institution for coaches in Asia and probably one of the biggest in the world as of today. They say, oh, I always ask them, whoever directly comes to me and for some, they say, why do you want to be a coach? Because I love working with people. So great, that's a good starting point. So are you quite okay that you love working with people and be of service to them, that you would do it without taking any money? Of course, then there is a big silence. So what is it that you really want to do? Oh, I need to have money. I also need to provide service. Then how much money? So pretty soon, it's very clear that very few, at least people who approach us, I'm sure there are others who do it differently, they would like to make this a paying profession where they are able to get some decent remuneration, which will allow them to move out of the corporate space that they are in, if they are already there, and make a living completely as a freelance coach in one way or another, as an external coach for many people that I come into contact with. And that's not going to happen as a life coach. It's very simple. I mean, everybody can have their opinions, but anywhere in the world, I've got enough of financial remunerative data and surveys and all that available. I don't think anyone is going to be able to make money by being a life coach. So you would necessarily have to be a kind of an executive coach, a business coach, or some coach, or whatever it is, where finally the people who are paying you are really the organization. It's not the boss of the person that I coach, or the L&D person, or the CHRO. So the question that I always have in mind in front of me is, what value am I adding to the organization? Not just to the individual. If you're paying so much, I charge quite a lot. If you're paying so much money to me, what is that organization getting out of it? And if I can do it in a better way, that distributed cost per person is lower, why wouldn't you want to do that? Now, very often, the answer to this is not clear to them because it is not being faced by the person who is responsible for the P&L. It is faced by a person who is a functional head, such as HR, who is unable to take the decision, or when he takes a decision to a bunch of, let's say, CXOs who I have talked to, after having said all that I have to say, they will come back and tell me, no, we would prefer to, we cannot, we do not like to be coached as a team. And one of those things, I got so annoyed. I said, you don't want to be coached in a team, but you think that you work as a team. How do you work as a team? Tell me. And of course, I didn't get the job. That's okay. But now, maybe not every one of us can afford to be, someone might call it arrogant, or just say their point of view. I recently had a discussion with one of very, very large financial institutions in the world, along with my CEO. And so it was for training a bunch of them for changing culture as coaches, part coaching, part training, all that kind of a stuff. So then, much against the advice of my CEO, I launched on how it'll benefit the organization if I did larger systemic work for that organization. At the end of it, after the conversation, they told my CEO, we would still like to work with you, but we'll take up Ram at a later point in time on his offer. But we would like to work with some people who we think will relate to the people that we are thinking about. So one of my trainers who I had trained, she's working with them. That's fine. That's absolutely fine with me. But I'm just saying, yeah, horses for courses. That's okay. So yeah, I leave it there.
So you're saying that the systemic and the team coaching approach is not that acceptable yet, and the individual coaching is also right now needs to connect with the result of the organization. That's what I'm hearing.
No, that's my perspective, because, like for instance, in the particular case that we talked to was the CHRO and the head of L&D. I didn't have the opportunity to talk to the CEO or the CFO or someone who runs a P&L. So there was no question about, they're not even bothered about what the ROIs are. We want them to train. So I specifically asked them, what are your pain points? What is it that you want to achieve? Oh, we want them to better communicate this, that, whatever it is. Whatever it is, it's okay. And like Bram rightly said, at the end of the day, yeah, they are going to measure you by your credibility. So there is going to be some feedback survey that is going to be provided. So if you score 4 out of 5 on that, you're probably okay. So so then the coach has to work in terms of, am I here to get a score of 4 out of 5? And what do I need to do to get the 4 out of 5? Rather than perhaps do something in the larger interest of the organization. So those are the kind of questions that come up.
Interesting. Let me hear what Bimal has to say about the same thing.
Right. So maybe three things, Jaya, and I won't take a long time just. So firstly, I think very often, there is a conflict in what Ram and rightly pointed out that, there's a conflict between personal gains or personal credibility and money and all that on the one side, and what will benefit the individual, the organization. Okay. My view has been, and for many years, and it seems to work, at least certainly for me, if not for other people, that you should not look at this as a either or process. I think it is in your own mind that you first need to resolve this, that it is an and process. There's a value you bring to the organization and to the individual, and you should not be shortchanged. Now, that is not to say that you need to be arrogant, but you certainly need to be aware and have the self-respect to be able to make a choice whether you want to work with a particular organization or individual if you're not getting the appropriate respect and so on and so forth. Okay, so I want to change the paradigm from either or to an and in this aspect, because till you get the and in your mind very clear, you will always continue to have this challenge for any coach actually. I think the second aspect is more to do with the fact, Ram used the phrase horses for courses, and that is perfectly true. But having said that, I think it is also to do with the fact that I think many coaches, and I used to do that, so I must say this because I was also a business leader for a large part of my career. You almost go in with a lot of assumptions into any conversation, right? And at the first sign of a difference of opinion with a client, whether it's a CHRO or this thing, the unwillingness to explore and almost make a judgment that the CHRO is a quote-unquote joker, or the L&D manager doesn't know anything and they are only interested in a rating or whatever it is. I think maybe a little bit more patience and a little bit more exploration often helps, because like everything else in coaching, conversation very often uncovers things which you are not aware of. So I think as coaches, the less judgmental we are, I think it helps you in actually then being able to add value in the organization in the longer run, right? And I think the third thing is the practical side of things, right? Very, very practical, because both of these may sound very philosophical in nature. I think in practice, people must choose and understand what is their own caliber as a coach, and what is it, why are they in it? What is it that they are in it for? If they can actually have that clarity, then some of these questions will get answered, very quickly. And they must be willing to, like any other game, you must be willing to practice and, get better and, build your credibility over time and so on and so forth. And maybe the summary part, Jay, I will say, where you started with the question, and Ram answered that in a nice way. But just because I am a passionate people person doesn't necessarily make me a great coach. Okay. And I think the best story I can give you is that, so Harsha Bhogle, the cricketer, tells this story that he was very passionate about cricket, but he's never become a cricketer himself, right? He does other things which are equally good. So somebody who's very passionate about people can do many other things in life than become a coach necessarily. This is not the only, outlet for somebody who's very passionate about people, right? So it doesn't translate on a one-to-one basis. There are many other options, and people should look at those options if they want to pursue coaching as the only alternative. Certainly there are lots more options if you are a great people person, so to say, or you're passionate about people.
So thank you for being so candid on this conversation. And I'm reminded of a statement from one of a very, very senior coach. I recently attended a program, and he said, you need to stop being in the supplier mindset, being a coach, because you need to look at the larger picture. And I think that's how I'll summarize this particular the conversation that we're all hinting at, that you have to look at the larger picture. You have to look at the benefit of the organization who's paying for it, and not only worry about whether my sessions have been paid or not.
Yeah.
And go beyond. And if it is just a career, then again, these are the questions which will come out, and these are the roadblocks which will hit you again and again. So Interesting. I really now want to deviate towards the questions that are coming on the chat box for everyone so that, we address them. And the first question is come from Ridhima, which she says, how effective is grooming an internal coach within an organization? Will leaders open up to an internal coach? How would you respond to that?
So maybe I can.
Yeah, yes, Himanshu.
So in my previous organization, I was heading strategy, leadership development, and then I was asked to create a coaching model which is based on Eastern and Western philosophy. And the mandate was to really take a pool of 3,000 leaders, and of which find a 300 lot who would be direct reportees to the then CEO, which is N. Chandra. Now, what initially started is people's appetite to simply spend time with me and share some of their problems. Now, the root for that is I was responsible for strategy, implementing balanced scorecard. And in that process, when I go and meet various domain leaders, they would share problem either pertaining to their boss or pertaining to their teams or even peers. It is in those conversations where I started asking questions which made sense to them and made them think differently. I didn't realize when I became an internal coach. And there was a very huge acceptability. And if I have to dig 3 reasons, firstly, people found that this person is an independent person. He has a view of his own. He is not working on behalf of any of the senior leaders. So there is no mandate. So the safety net was created. Second, business leaders are extremely busy. They want, if they spend 15 minutes with you, they want a meaningful outcome of that conversation. So how can you be precise, ask the right questions, bring the right stories, and make them think differently, and they walk away with some ideas? So internal coach, I was really fortunate. And in fact, I took the top 10 leaders to a global innovation program at Tuck School of Business, where I worked with VG, and that's where I met Marshall in 2010. And it can work, provided there is a credibility, there is an authenticity, and people see that this person is not working for any particular mandate. He's a right soundboard.
Okay.
So one of the things that worked in my favor is that I was not an insider. I came from an outside lateral. Probably that also helped.
Interesting. So being an internal coach, I can very well relate to that and understand that your own, again, going back to credibility and personal brand, right? As to how do you show up and how are you conducting yourself in the organization will determine the effectiveness of what you're doing and how you're coming across. Great. Let me move to another question, which says, is executive leadership moving from leader as hero to collective leadership model? What are you observing? Bimal, what would you say about that?
Sorry, I actually didn't get the question.
Maybe I can invite Pradeep to open up his mic and share the question more clearly.
Hi, Jaya. Good evening. Hi. Yeah. So,
ask your question.
Yes. Just to throw more light on this question, most of the assignments that were coming in the past was considering from the point of view of executive leadership, especially for the C-suite, where we are talking about executive leadership for a particular leader as a hero. It could be executive presence, enhancing executive presence, a behavioral trait. It could be succession. It could be anything else. So is it now moving from a singular one as leader as a hero to a collective leadership model where the leadership is now shared in between a lot more stakeholders in the organization, and the stakeholders being many parts of the C-suite and one level below that?
Yeah, so let me try and attempt, because I think it's a broader question than a coaching question, really. Okay, and here are my thoughts on that. So I think if you want to address that question, saying that as a philosophy, does the company or the organization want to move from a more create one or two heroes versus a more collective leadership model? There are other issues about how do you organize yourself, structure, responsibility and roles, and so on and so forth, rewards and reward mechanisms and so on and so forth. So there's a broader context to that, right? Having said that, if you are talking about investment in one or two people versus a larger set of leaders, I think clearly there's a lot more acceptance that companies are now wanting to invest not just in C-suite but also below that, and maybe even high potentials at a slightly more lower level, where companies are saying we need a broader set of leaders to lead the organization rather than focusing on one or two heroes, right? But I think the question of collective leadership, just to summarize that, is not a question of of coaching alone. I think it is more an issue of how do you want to organize your company, and who do you see playing critical roles in taking your company forward, right? And there are related questions about hierarchy, structure, levels of authority, culture of the organization, history of the organization, who's playing the leadership role, is it a family company, and so on and so forth. So there are many other dimensions to that. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question fully, but this is what came to my mind when you're asking that question.
Thank you, Bimal. In interest of time, I'll just take a couple of more questions before we close. And there's a question from Sakina, and she is asking, at one end, sponsors seek accountability and reporting for the leaders, that is coach, and the other end, confidentiality is essential too. How does an external coach manage that dilemma? Ram, how would you like to respond to that?
Actually, this question in some way is related to the earlier question about internal coaches and external coaches. One of the biggest challenges, I heard Himanshu, yes, there are surely exceptional people who can perform the role of an internal coach and satisfy people that whatever happens is going to be completely confidential and that's not going to be passed on to the organization in some way. But a lot of research on this, and there's a lot of research done on this, internal coaches and external coaches, does show that in general, people have issues in the company about going to internal coaches and matters which could potentially be affecting their career in the organization. And so there is a bit of a crisis of confidentiality in all those cases. And this has got no reflection on the caliber of the internal coaches, but the very fact that internal coaches are part of the larger organizational structure. That person is not an ombudsman who is beyond the system. Whereas in an external coach, by and large, in my experience, most coaches that I have worked with have fairly strict standards about saying that anything that happens within the coach-client space of the conversation cannot be and will not be shared. So generally, the organizations will want to know, like many very, very large organizations I have worked with, yeah, they would say, we still would like to have some kind of a report from you. I would say, what is the kind of report that you want from me? Why don't you get it from the client? So I don't need to provide a report. The client can provide a report. So very often, even when we have stakeholder conversations, and which is part of all my coaching assignments, I would ask them to basically, the clients to actually explain what is happening. And if there is anything that I need to amplify and provide as an explanation, I would do that. Otherwise, I will not make any comment on what the client and I in any way have discussed. And that's the only way. Otherwise, it's a road to the ruin if a coach is found to be disclosing information which he's not supposed to disclose. So generally, if a coach is ethical, the question that Sakina is asking should not really be happening. I mean, it should not be an issue for any coach. They can very clearly, we all quote the ethics of whether it's ICF or EMCC or whoever it is and say, look, we cannot share with you if you would like to hire us on that basis. And there hasn't been a single company so far in my experience who has come back, or a HR person, and who said, no, you must provide it. Yeah, sometimes they might probe. We have open conversation. And coming back to, just want to make a comment on what Bimal said. I have tremendous respect for HR and L&D people. I have trained some of the senior HR managers in this country and L&D managers. It is just that organizationally today, somehow, HR hasn't become a part of the P&L structure of the company. And while they are the deciders in terms of who the coaches are, I'm not sure they have really, because they don't have the authority for or the responsibility for the P&L, they are able to look at it from that perspective. I'm sure there are companies where it is done. I know companies where there are people, HR people in some very large groups who also are HR as well as they hold a business position. So they have a slightly different perspective in terms of what they do. So both things happen. However good they are, and I know many of them extremely well, their hands are tied up. And they basically say, hey, this is what the CXO says. An L&D manager who's probably 2 levels below them have absolutely no authority to question what the CXO says.
Interesting. Interesting. So I think
Jaya, one of the points which I'd like to make here is, so unless there is an issue of financial impropriety or embezzlement, as a coach, I will never kind of share what is required. Many times I may convince the coachee, okay, this is in your interest that you may like to communicate to your stakeholder sponsor. And quite often it goes from his thing because it helps him in the process, because eventually it's stakeholders, they want to see the change. So a lot of influencing to the coachee, and you can have the right message conveyed to the principal stakeholder sponsor. Yeah.
thank you. And this is again tying back to what I was about to say, that it's all going back to saying that let's open up our minds to say it's not only about the individual, right? We have to somewhere move beyond the individual or the traditional definition of coaching and understand that it's a system which is paying for it. And whom am I serving? Am I serving the individual and getting paid for that? And if that's the case, why is organization paying for that? And how do I, without a breach of confidentiality, serve the stakeholders, serve the system, and at the same time serve the individual? And that's where the stakeholder coaching comes in place, and that's where the systemic coaching comes in place, the team coaching comes in place, where we have to come out of the definitions of confidentiality and understand that there are thin lines, right? It is also interesting that under the carpet of confidentiality, there is a lot of inefficiency which exists, which is also a reason why a lot of coaches do not want to expand their practice, because, you know, what if everybody knows what am I doing? And that becomes a reason for low efficiency in this industry. So I'm not sure, how would you like to respond to that?
So, before I go to that, Jaya, I just wanted to, because I've been seeing some of the messages on the chat board and, stuff like that, and, saying that, there's a trend to move towards systemic coaching. Okay. I think, my view is that, firstly, I think we should not use these terms interchangeably. Group coaching is very different from team coaching to going to systemic coaching, because these are 3 very different kind of concepts and the way they are practiced. And when you're talking about systemic coaching, you're actually talking about beyond the individual, right? Well beyond. So you're actually taking a look at, structures, process, history, DNA of the organization, culture, many other things, rather than just research, right? Team coaching is where your objectives are to make the team function, together, this thing. And group coaching is more about the people are going on their individual journeys, but just as a process, you are coaching them together as against coaching them, this thing. So I just want to make those definitions clear, because otherwise what happens is that we, very often as coaches, I think we tend to confuse the 3. Okay. And I want to make that very clear. So my view is that, in a context like India, and actually most of Asia, where I do most of my work, a little bit in Europe, but even in Europe, that is true, I think. At the senior most levels, I think the issue of privacy and what a person can share or not share is unlikely to happen in a group coaching kind of a situation. I'm using group coaching very deliberately. If you have a team coaching situation where, you are collectively taking the team on an alignment path, and, the points Ram was raising in terms of that, how do you work together better? How do you make? I think certainly group coaching can make a significant impact, kind of thing. The systemic coaching, my belief is that it borders very closely on consulting, and it borders very, very closely on, sort of other aspects of, management helping, which are not necessarily always very clear whether they are actually coaching or not. But anyway, let me get back from that and go back to your question, right? So I think under the garb of confidentiality, yes, there is a possibility that people quote unquote maybe hiding things. Let's put it this way, and let's call it out, right? But I would tend to believe that I think confidentiality, in spite of all of that, is an absolute necessity, right? Because if you don't have a trust in the organization, and like any other profession, there'll be a normal curve, there'll be some outstanding people, and there'll be a large chunk in the middle, and then there'll be a tail, and so on and so forth. And hopefully the tail is moving towards the middle and from the towards the forward part of the curve, so to say. But because of a few quote unquote, let's say professional coaches who are learning through the journey, I think we should not attempt to subvert the confidentiality process or the trust process, because then you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to say. Okay. If Jaya, I may take half a minute more, I wanted to also comment on this internal versus external coaches, and I know some people on this call may later sort of bash me up, but let me say this, right? So I think internally, a lot of HR people want to become coaches, professional coaches. HR people as a profession, because of the way the function is and all that, are possibly the worst fit for an internal coach. Not because of their capability, they may be extremely capable, but perhaps the two hats they wear of a coach and an internal coach and a HR professional within the company actually don't go well together. So as a HR person, trying to do coaching inside may not be a very bright idea, in my opinion.
Interesting. I think we are witnessing some very, very candid conversation. I'm sure we are all adults and professionals to understand that this is not meant for a particular person. So this is actually what is the experience we are noticing, and there is a lot of responsibility as coaches that we have on our credibility and the way we hold conversations with the organizations, and make sure that the person who's paying for it sees the result and look at things holistically. With that, I want to say thank you to all of you. I understand Ram has to rush for another call, and we are anyway on top of our hour. So thank you so much, Ram, Bimal, and Himanshu, for your presence and for taking the questions and taking out time for us. Thank you so much. The conversation has been really
Jaya, and thank you, everybody. It was
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Ram. Thank you.